Hey guys, Sean here, and I have a question for you right from the off. Lando Norris, Oscar Piastri, or Max Verstappen, who will be the 2025 Formula One World Drivers' Champion? That is the big question on everyone's lips right now, and I, for one, can't quite believe we've somehow ended up with an apparent three-way battle. I mean, after all, following Lando Norris's mechanical DNF at Zandvoort and Oscar Piastri's win, the Aussie had a seemingly comfortable 34-point lead over his teammate, with Max Verstappen a whopping 104 points off the top spot. Fast forward 5 races and it is definitely game on. Norris now has the championship lead, but only by 1 point, and Verstappen is just the 36 points away from the Brit. All of that has ensured that we are in for a close and hopefully thrilling end to the season, but who is it going to be? Well, back in the summer, I was split between the two McLaren drivers, but felt that Piastri would just about edge it, and that is, of course, still very possible. However, I didn't expect to see the Aussie's form drop off as dramatically as it has, or even for Verstappen's form to improve to the extent that it has. The two of those coinciding with Norris's improvement, creating the perfect storm for Piastri's lead to vanish fairly quickly. And yes, I do think, to his credit, there has been an improvement from Norris. I've said many times that he always seems to have a mistake in him, which is why I doubted he'd be able to overhaul his teammates' advantage. But although not perfect, those mistakes seem to have become less frequent, and his performance across the Mexico City Grand Prix weekend was arguably his best, certainly one of his best, and probably his most complete weekend to date. As I say, his upturn in form hasn't been perfect, and it does still feel like he's missing a killer instinct. I mean, take Baku and Austin as two examples. There were moments in those races where it looked like he wasn't quite willing to make a bold move when it seemed on to help make his way through the field more swiftly, particularly at COTA, where he spent so long behind Charles Leclerc. And frankly, I can't help but feel a Max Verstappen, Michael Schumacher, Fernando Alonso, insert name here, would have got that overtake done at more or less the first opportunity and then gone on to maximise their result. I'm not comparing him to those drivers at all. I'm just saying that is something Norris is just missing at this stage of his career. He's quick, no doubt about that, leads the championship, and again his Mexico weekend was excellent, but he still has room to grow and areas he needs to improve, something he may need to do quickly if he's going to get this title over the line in the coming weeks. As for his teammate, he has been so cool and calm all year and has appeared unflappable under huge pressure. He's just about won more races than anyone else in 2025 and looked, honestly, to have the title under control and pretty much in the bag, helped, of course, by Norris crashing into him in Canada and the Brits' DNF at Zandvoort, but still, he looked good. But the roles have been reversed in recent weeks, with the Aussie now looking like the vulnerable one. His sloppy Baku weekend ultimately ending in a DNF, his lowest point of the year. He was off the pace in Singapore and in Austin too, and although he certainly had a better race than he did qualifying in Mexico, he still only managed a P5 finish versus his teammates' crushing dominant victory. A good recovery, yes, but still a very big hit. What is really fascinating is that his slump this season has come at the same run of races he struggled to match Norris at for outright pace in 2024. That's Singapore, Austin, and Mexico, of course. So when people ask the question, what is going on with Piastri, maybe the answer is as simple as these are his weaker tracks. I'll emphasise the word maybe again because things are never quite that straightforward in Formula One. But if it is that, then the Aussie needs to worry because that slump versus Norris continued last year into Brazil and Vegas. And as I said in the Mexico qualifying watch-along, he needs to get it together quickly because he has, if you like, played all of his jokers now and can't afford any more off weekends. Very quickly, it is worth noting that the not his best tracks argument is sort of backed up by Andrea Stella, who said post-Mexico that Piastri's driving style may not suit low-grip conditions like Austin and in Mexico. So let's hope for his sake and the sake of a close title fight that he finds form again in Brazil, although that is a low-grip track too, so he may struggle again if that theory is correct. And that brings us on very nicely to Max Verstappen. It was believed he was out of it come the summer break and any lingering hope was gone after Zandvoort. A 104-point deficit, surely too much even for him to overcome. However, wins at Monza, Baku and Austin with podiums in Singapore and Mexico slash that gap down to just 36 points, and suddenly he is right in the fight. He has had some help along the way, no doubt about that. Piastri's drop-off in form, McLaren's 4-race winless run, faffing with papaya rules and running into each other and retiring in Nico to sprint have certainly flung the door wide open, and the Dutchman seems determined to waltz right through it and take title number 5. That did take a slight hit in Mexico because despite closing the gap at the top, it wasn't a big gain and he ideally needed to close in by a greater margin than he did, but he kept himself in it with his solid drive to take P3 at a weekend where that seemed unlikely due to the car's lack of pace compared to its rivals. What has also really helped the Dutchman has been Red Bull's insistence on continuing to develop its 2025 car when its rivals have for the most part stopped, which has allowed the gap in performance compared to McLaren to come down. Couple that with the ability we already know that Verstappen has, and they have a genuine shot at pulling off what seemed impossible as recently as just a few weeks ago. Now, don't get me wrong, he is an outsider in the fight, no doubt, and he may well need another bad weekend from McLaren if he is going to give himself a better shot come the season finale, but the fact of the matter is, if anyone can, Max can, and I refuse to write him off completely until it is mathematically impossible. It has to be said as well that his experience in title fights and winning championships could prove invaluable across the next 4 races too. Before I make my title winner prediction though, which upcoming races are pivotal and where could it be won? Now firstly, the answer to part 1 of that could be as simple as every race is going to be pivotal because it really is that close. A 1-point lead is not a lot, and I'd actually argue that the psychological impact of Norris taking the lead with 4 to go is greater than the point itself. Of course, if he wins by 1 point in Abu Dhabi, which he really could, then that's nonsense, but right now it's a huge factor. What is interesting is that the final run-in is not straightforward at all. All 4 tracks are very different and they each have their own quirks. Interlagos can be a lottery, not least because of the weather and the fact it is another sprint event. Vegas is still relatively new and so teams and drivers are still getting to grips with it. It's also a street track where one mistake could be severely punished. Qatar is also relatively new, a sprint weekend, and as we've seen before, the heat can be a big factor. And although it doesn't always throw up the best of races, if we arrive at Abu Dhabi with next to nothing between the top 3, all bets are off. It really is set to be a fascinating run-in. I also read an article on the race earlier this week, and John Noble made an excellent point that I wanted to highlight. He said in that article, which I will link in the description, that perhaps in the end, the title isn't going to be won by winning on the good days, but it could instead come down to how good you are on your bad days. And I think he's absolutely spot on there. Hence, I suppose, why Verstappen and Piastri's bounce back on Sunday in Mexico was so important. It minimised the damage done by Norris's perfect weekend on what was a relatively bad weekend for those two. With all of that said, my answer to the question I asked myself, because I'm like that, is that whether it is all 3 of them or just 2 of them, this title will be decided at the season finale. Now, that might sound obvious, but my point is I don't expect this to get wrapped up with races to spare. So unless the wheels fall off for 2 of them, I just don't see how this doesn't go down to the wire. So with all that in mind, who do I think it will be? Well, for the avoidance of doubt, I am very much Team Verstappen, but I am starting to wonder if cutting a 36-point gap down and taking the title in just 4 races is a little bit too much even for him. Sure, he closed the deficit down by more than that between Monza and Mexico, that's 5 races, but that was, as I said earlier, helped by McLaren tripping over themselves. He's likely going to need some more of that if he wants to pull it off. However, I really can't shake the feeling that we are going to see at least one more moment between the McLaren pair, almost an inevitability you could say in a close fight, and that Max will be the one to capitalise on that. He also has excellent form in Brazil, Abu Dhabi, and even won in Qatar last year, despite people not giving him a hope in hell of doing it on a track that many thought would be a McLaren weekend through and through. I'll say it again, and frankly, you're going to hear this a lot between now and the end of the season. If anyone can, Max can. So if I'm letting my heart take charge, I go for Verstappen. My head, though, says this is likely between the 2 McLaren drivers, and over the last 12 months or so, I've let my heart rule my head too much and things haven't exactly worked out, so I'm going to actually listen to my head for once. And here's the thing, I can't shake the feeling, and perhaps some of you will feel the same, that things have shifted away from Piastri, partly because of his own errors, of course, but he also doesn't seem totally at one with the car in the same way he did earlier in the season. Maybe that does come down to the low grip conditions as Andrea Stella theorised, but time is running out and he needs to find form now before this gets away from him completely. If he does, then this really is a flip of a coin because Piastri has proven he can be superb on his day and Norris has done exactly the same. But based on the here and now and everything I've said to this point and the apparent momentum shift, I am going to change my summer break prediction and say that Lando Norris will, against all the odds just a few weeks ago, take the title in Abu Dhabi. Now, if you've never watched any of my content before, let me make one thing clear. Piastri or Norris, I don't care. If Oscar wins it, great stuff. We also get our first Aussie World Champion since 1980, which would be nice. But if Norris wins it, that's also great. If Max was able to pull it off, though, I may have to do a little dance on stream. But as much as it could happen, and I'd love it to, I am sticking with my Norris versus Piastri prediction. That is it for this one, though. I just wanted my first proper video on the new channel to be a classic Sean waffle. That way, if you do choose to subscribe, then at least you know what you're getting yourself into right from the start. But let me know down in the comments who you think will win the title in 2025. And on your way down there, please do leave a like on the video and consider subscribing too so you don't miss any future videos or live streams. Lots to come over the next few weeks and hopefully years. And it would be amazing to have you along for the journey. But as ever, thank you for watching. I've been Formula Sean, and until next time, goodbye.